Well, rope has its problems, and I think it was particularly because I think probably you could argue that Hitchcock was the greatest editor amongst directors there's ever been, someone who was so aware of the power of editing. So it seemed a bit counterintuitive for him, of all people, to make a one-shot movie. So the tension in the movie slacks off slightly because it's such a conventional thriller. But a movie like Birdman, which I loved and I thought worked on every level, that inspired me. I also, did the first 8 or 9 minutes of Spectre was one shot, and that gave me a bit more confidence that perhaps we could do this. Where this differs from something like Birdman is, is going around within interiors and is often returning to the same scenes. This is very, very linear and is travelling so much distance over so many different kinds of landscape and so many different locations, and you don't know what's around the next corner. The challenges were to do with shooting in exteriors and extreme conditions, measuring every set to be exactly the length of the scene, because there was no parallel action, so I couldn't cut away to somebody else. It had to be absolutely the right length. So we were out there in the countryside pacing up and down with our scripts months and months before we constructed the sets. Well, I would love to make people see the war in a different and new way, but that wasn't my intention in making the film. I'm not on a crusade. There's a good reason why Hollywood particularly has been more interested in the Second World War, and that's because you guys fought in it. Right, so fair enough. No, serious. That's, you didn't have a military presence in the First World War. For us in Europe, it's a significant cultural, it's an edifice that even people of my generation remember and talk about and get taught in school long before the Second World War. And, there's a reason why we wear poppies, at certain times of the year, where we lay the wreaths of poppies. The First World War is remembered almost with the same, if not more, intensity than the Second World War. So I have a personal connection. Obviously, it was my grandfather's story as well. But I do think that the scale of the war and the human cost and the sheer the physical size of it over time is something that's very difficult to describe in film. And I hope through the micro story of these two men travelling through this landscape, you begin to understand the sheer scale of it, as well as following this sort of ticking clock thriller.
It was exciting. I remember it was in the audition. He said, of course, well, basically, we're going to try and keep this under wraps, but this is all going to be, in one take. I just thought, this is a whole other level. But because the thing is, in the doing of it, it's the most mutual experience that I've ever had on a job, in terms of a scene or a shot can't work unless everything's working in harmony, and that gives you a real healthy awareness of everyone around you, and by the same token their awareness of you. So it was this real mutual collaboration always. Everything was planned meticulously, and yeah, it really, the camera, when you watch the film, it is an immersive experience, and it is almost like a character in itself. It's not showy at all. You don't notice it as a big one-shot film. It's not at all a gimmick. It's just about, this is the best way to serve and tell the story. But the work that the camera team did, Roger operating, and some of the gear that we were using, and Charlie and Pete and Gary, Malcolm, all of the crew who were operating these cameras and these rigs, some of which have been built for the purposes of the film. We're developing new technology to make it. It's so exciting. It's it was amazing. We all had a real sort of appreciation of each other in the doing of it.
Before this movie, I didn't actually know a lot about World War One. I seem to know a little bit more about World War Two than I did the First World War. So I did loads of research to prepare myself, and I contacted my family members and asked them about my ancestors to see the story of it, and they said, yeah, check out this book, Western Front Diaries. It's snippets of diary entries of the soldiers of the war, and his name was David Henry Pearce, and he was part of the cavalry, and he got shot in no man's land and was paralysed, and he survived out in no man's land for 4 days, and he survived the war, and then he worked in a poppy factory until he died. That really, I was trying to find stories to relate to before I played this character, and an ancestor that was in the war, you couldn't ask for a more relatable thing. So
I mean, as Sam says, it starts with horse charges, it ends with tanks, and it's seismic in the world at large. You know, everything from the women's movement right through to the kind of death of the British Empire is all wrapped up in World War I, and I mean, in fact, the complete destruction of the Ottoman Empire. So it is. I'm sorry, I'm so nerdy. So it is, in a way, a really fascinating 4-year slice of history in our world. And the other thing is, you know, it's just passed out of living memory. It's just out of our reach, but there's still so much out there. There's so many first-hand accounts, there's so many resources. I mean, at the Imperial War Museum in London, they have veterans recording in their own voice their experiences that you can go and listen to. So it's still, in a way, at our fingertips. And there's you know, 60 million people caught up in the war, 60 million stories. Like, I mean, it's an absolute gem.
Well, I kind of knew quite a lot about First World War. I edited a book in my 20s, which was the correspondence between my grandmother and First World War poet Rupert Brooke, who was killed on his way to Gallipoli. And so I knew a lot about the experiences of not only British soldiers, but also the country as a whole, how people felt about the war, how it affected a whole generation of not only men but women who were left back at home, who were often then, you know, widowed. So, you know, I had a lot of that in my mind. I think what I hadn't really delved into was the everyday experiences of the troops on the ground, which we were able to access through. There are hundreds of first-person diaries in the Imperial War Museum in London, just talking about, you know, their experiences, letters home, diary entries, and really what it was like to fight a war on that scale.